You're listening to TuneFM 106.9. I'm Goodness Odebo, and today we have an important guest in our midst in person of Elandri. Elandri is a PhD candidate at the Animal Genetics and Breeding Unit. Elandri's PhD is focusing on beef cattle, because she is into genetics, so she is working on animal genetics. And as I said, she is at the Animal Breeding and Genetics Unit of the University of New England. Before beginning her PhD, Elandri has had wealth of experience working with Wagyu South Africa. Today, we're going to be discussing about Elandri's PhD research. You're welcome to the studio, Elandri.
Goodness, thank you for having me, and hello to all the listeners.
Yeah, it's really a great pleasure having you around. So, Elandri, could we just start by you telling us what you're focusing on in your PhD research?
Sure. So, as you've mentioned, I am a PhD student at AGBU, which is short for the Animal Genetics and Breeding Unit here at UNE. And my research mostly focused on meat quality traits in beef cattle. Essentially, I am looking at selection behind the perfect steak.
Oh, really great. Selection behind the perfect steak. Does that mean that your research is going to help to produce steak, or let me say beef, right? Mm-hmm. Beef that is pretty much better than what we used to have.
Yeah, that's it, right? So, when we think about genetics and selection, it's really about finding the right cow and bull with the right or the ideal genetics to give to produce progeny that will lead to the perfect steak. But before we can find the right cow and bull, we really have to understand what it is that we are looking at in terms of meat quality, because it's such a vast subject, right? So my research mostly focused on the step just before that, what is meat quality and how do we measure it, and what is the genetic influence of that.
Okay, now just talking about genetic influence, can you explain how genetic influence or how genetic selection influences beef?
Yeah, so genetic selection works similarly for most traits, in sense that what you want to do is look at how much genetics influence a particular characteristic. Let me give you a different sample. So let's ignore beef cattle for a moment, and let's think about humans. So, have you ever in your own family, have a remark of someone saying, when a new baby is born, oh yeah, that person has the family nose or the family ears, right?
Yeah,
that happens to all of us. Yeah. And so that is genetics. So within a family, similar traits are inherited. And so what I'm looking at is that same sort of idea, but for meat. And, just as in humans, it's the same with cattle and any other organism, there are many factors that influence the genetic characteristics of traits and how much of it is actually genetically inherited versus environmentally controlled. And, some traits are more complex than others. So my research really focused on the idea behind that in terms of meat quality in beef.
Okay, great. Now, for beef or for cattle generally, we have many breeds, right? If I'm right.
Yeah.
Does your research focus on all the breeds or some selected breed of cattle?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. It's difficult to capture the variety in all of the breeds. So my research has a bit of different breeds in it, but one of the breeds that is mostly prominent or features a lot in my research is Wagyu, but I look at some of the other breeds as well. Yeah.
Okay, great. Then could you just tell us what specifically are you doing? Just a summary of what specifically you're doing.
Yeah. So when we think about meat quality, we're really thinking in terms of three things. So we're thinking about tenderness and we're thinking about juiciness. And so my research really focuses on, what is tender beef and juiciness in terms of a term that maybe a lot of your listeners have heard of before called marbling, which really captures the muscle or the fat particles in between the muscle on your steak. So this is different from the outside muscle or the outside fat on the muscle of the steak that you buy, and it really impacts the flavor of the meat and the tenderness of it as well.
Yeah, great. Okay, now just for people to really kind of understand what you're saying, if you could just summarize in a nutshell, how does your research contribute to improving cattle breeding and genetics?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like I said, it's really about focusing on the traits itself in order to improve selection by understanding what it is that we're selecting for.
Great. Okay, so that means if I get what you mean, right? So from selection, you select the right traits, and then you improve those traits so they become better. And part of the trait you said is mumbling, or what do you say?
Marbling, yeah.
Okay, so that means in a nutshell, your research is going to help for us to get beef that is more tender.
Yeah.
So when people are kind of eating, they're going to be eating yummy beef, right? Not like the hard type that we have
tough
to chew.
and dry meat.
But now, talking about tenderness, does the age of the beef, does it not affect the tenderness of the beef?
Yeah, so generally speaking, younger cattle do have more tender beef than older cattle. Of course, other influences are also impact factor. And then there's a process after slaughter called beef aging or meat aging, which essentially means that the meat is hanging for a certain section of time to allow the meat to become more tender before it is fully processed and packaged.
Okay, now, so with your research, it's going to make the older beef to be more tender, or is it beef or the older cattle to have more tender beef, so people would actually enjoy the beef that they are eating, right?
So tenderness is very much affected by the cut of beef that you would eat, right? So certain parts of the carcass are genetically more tender than other parts of the carcass. But my research will, so if you think about this in sort of a graph where you go from non-tender to very tender, we're just moving that to the more tender side. So you'll still find that within age, younger beef would still be more tender than older animals, but the tenderness will be improved versus in time, same age, maybe 5 years later.
Yeah, interesting. It seems to me as if you really have the passion for what you're doing. Can you please tell us about your journey into animal breeding and genetics? What inspired you to pursue this field?
Yeah, so like you said, I'm from South Africa, and I did my first degree in South Africa in animal science, after which I actually did a master's in production physiology and product quality. After completing my master's, I started working for Wagyu South Africa, which is the Breeders' Association for Wagyu cattle in South Africa. And a big responsibility of my job there was a technical aspect, where I mostly helped with looking at carcasses and trying to determine their scoring and for quality purposes later on. And so I really started to express to my manager at that stage of, wanting to do research in this and look at the genetic influence behind the expression of these tenderness traits, because there are certain breeds that have just more tender beef naturally than other breeds, which lends itself to the idea of genetics. And that's what brought me to this field.
Oh, great. That is really interesting. Now, you are now in the University of New England, and specifically the Animal Genetics and Breeding Unit. If you could just let us know what led you to choose the University of New England for your research.
Oh, that is such a great question. So while working for Wagyu South Africa, my manager was a guy that was highly influential in the Southern African livestock industry. So Southern African meaning not just South Africa, but other Southern countries as well. And he was a really prominent figure. And he was actually an alumnus of ACBU and UNE. So his name was Dr. Michael Bradfield. And unfortunately, at the end of 2021, he passed away.
Sad.
But he really inspired me in a lot of his genetics and to think about that. And then, as I said, he was an alumnus and he spoke highly of his time here and what he learned. And the one thing that he really emphasized was the launching pad of being able to get his doctorate degree from this institute in launching his career and propelling that forward to where he ended up.
Oh, great. That is very great story. Now, for your PhD, you're working on beef, on cattle, right? And then you're working on the genetics of cattle. What has been the most exciting part of your PhD research so far?
Yeah, I think one of the really exciting parts is being able to engage and learn from really prominent figures in the animal genetic sphere. Right here from AGBU, being able to be exposed to topics other than just my own research topic, other species and other fields. And then as part of my specific research topic in meat quality, I also have the opportunity to do a bit of lab work, which is a bit unique, and I enjoy that a lot.
Yes, a lot of people say that about the animal breeding and genetics unit. They talk about the staff, that they are really supportive, and I'm great, and it's really good to hear that again from you. What advice would you give to young researchers interested in animal genetics and breeding?
Well, if you're interested in animal breeding and genetics, I think maybe one of the things you want to do is maybe reach out to a doctoral or postdoc, a doctoral student, and just ask them what are they doing and what are they involved in, to see if that is something that you're interested in. But I think, and this may be more general advice, but I think really don't overthink it. And I know I've said think a lot, which is really ironic. But, don't overthink it. I think a lot of people and a lot of times, you go through phases in life and every moment feels like you're making the biggest decision of your life. And, with a little bit of experience, as someone that has something to give, even though it is pretty limited, I've come to realize that all of these big decisions aren't necessarily as big as you think it is. So, don't overthink it. If you really want to do it, just jump in. I think that's the best thing that you can do.
That's really great advice. And when will you likely be completing your PhD research?
So hopefully by the beginning of the year 2027.
Okay. So do you have any plans for your career after your PhD?
I'm pretty much an open-minded person, so I don't live by a 5-year mapped out strategy. That's just not the way I roll. So I'm someone that likes to embrace the unknown a bit. One of my friends I once spoke to her and she was feeling a bit anxious about thinking about the future. And I said to her, you know what, you just need to learn to embrace the chaos. And I feel like that's a really good mantra to have because it allows you to be open to more opportunities and to see what happens. And so that's how I'm approaching this as well, to look at what is presented to me at the time.
Yeah, that is good. That is pretty much a very good mindset. It's best for us to be open-minded, because there are a lot of opportunities, especially in your field, which is an animal genetics and breeding unit. Really great to have you here with us. Before we wrap up this session, is there anything you would want to say that we have not covered already?
There's one thing that sticks in my mind a bit. As someone that works with Wagyu, I feel like the need to just set the record straight. A lot of people come up to me and they ask, do Wagyu really get fed beer and get massages? So this is me once and for all dispelling that myth. No, they don't. They don't get fed beer. They don't get massages. They're treated like regular cattle. They just have their own sort of ration that encourages their marbling. But the myth actually comes from an advert in Japan that they ran to promote Wagyu at one stage, very long ago, a few decades ago. And somehow it went from an advert into a fact or a perceived fact. So I feel like we're setting the record straight on that.
Yeah, so Wagyu is a Japanese breed of cattle, right?
That's right. Wagyu is a breed of cattle that came from Japan. It's actually made up of 4 breeds of cattle. Really? But that is a whole lecture on its own.
All right. Thank you so much for coming today. It's really great having you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, goodness. It was really great being here.
Thank you. All right, that's all from us today. See you again next time. Keep listening to TuneFM 106.9.